Now that you've conducted some research and created a scatter plot based on the information that you gathered, we are going to talk about the different types of associations that you can have from scatter plots. So first of all, you have the variable association, and that just means looking at the scatter plots, in general, do the dots go up? And you can see here, this one has a positive because reading it from left to right, generally the dots increase. This one here, reading it from left to right, you can see that the dots generally go down, so that would be a negative association. And then looking at this third graph over here, there really isn't a general pattern. They don't generally go up, they don't generally go down, so they don't really have an association, so it is no association. Some other vocab that we need to talk about is if you have a positive or negative association, you can also have a linear association. So looking at the dots, do they generally go in a straight line, or do they kind of have a curve to them? So if they generally go in a straight line, they're going to have a linear association. But if they kind of have a curve to them like this one, that's going to be nonlinear. It still has, reading it from left to right, a positive association because in general they go up. It's just that they don't go up in a straight line. They kind of have a curved line to it. So again, you only have a linear association if it is positive or negative association, which we talked about above. If it does not have an association, you just say no association. You can analyze the shape of the distribution of a scatter plot to investigate patterns of association. So if the distribution shows a positive or negative association, then the distribution can be classified as linear or nonlinear, which is what I just talked about. The scatter plot below shows a positive nonlinear association, and it also has clusters or outlines that can be identified. So looking at their scatter plot, in general, their scatter plot kind of goes to a curve. So therefore, it's not a straight line. So it is nonlinear, which they talked about. And reading it from left to right, it generally goes up. So it has a positive association. So they said positive nonlinear association. Now we can also identify some clusters in here, which just means that they have a lot grouped up in once. So right here, you kind of have a cluster of them because there's a lot in a little space. When we identify clusters on our scatter plots, I want you to tell me the range of the x's that the cluster is in. So if this was labeled, let's say this would be 1, 2, 3, 4. My cluster has a range from 0 to 2 on the x-axis. So that's what you will be doing in your next step. Then it also has an outlier up here, and an outlier just kind of means it's away from all of the other data. So it doesn't really fit any of the other scatter plot points. It's kind of out there by itself, outer space, outlier. So then on your scatter plots, if you are identifying an outlier, I want you to tell me the exact coordinate or an estimate of the coordinate point. So if this would be labeled like a coordinate grid, I would say that this outlier's point is 1, 5, and that's how I would identify my outlier. So let's do an example together. So flip the page. If we're looking at example 2, actually I'm going to skip example 2, I'm going to go down to got it B. So first of all, we need to interpret the scatter plot from the data of the time elapsed and the temperature of water based on the shape of the distribution. So first of all, you have to ask yourself the variable association. Does it have a positive, negative, or no association? Well, looking at my graph, reading it from left to right, in general, the information kind of goes down. So I would say it has a negative association. And then looking at that line that I drew in, it's not a straight line, so it can't be linear. It's going to be nonlinear. Because remember, you have two options, nonlinear or linear. And it doesn't go in a straight line, so it is nonlinear. And then we have to identify some clusters. There's not really a group that are all together, so I would say no clusters. And then I need to see if there's any outliers, and there's not really any outliers. You would consider an outlier if you had something up there, but we don't, so we would say no outliers. And that is how we interpret the scatter plot. So we would say as our final answer, it is a negative, nonlinear association with no clusters or outliers. Okay, so then we go to got it C. So this, I'm going to erase it so that you guys can see it a little better. We have to again interpret the scatter plot of the data for 2 weeks in May and the amount of ice cream sold at a shop based on the shape of distribution. So if you look at it, first of all, we have to see if there are any variable associations. So again, positive, negative, or none, or no association. There's not really, looking at from left to right, it's not like the information generally goes up, and it's not really like it generally goes down. It's just kind of everywhere. So I would say this has no association. And since it has no association, it isn't linear and it isn't nonlinear. So we can't really answer that question. We would just say no association. We could look to see if we have any clusters. And it doesn't really appear like we have any clusters in here. They're not like a big group. Yeah, there's not really a big group in there. And then we talk about outliers. And this guy right here is kind of an outlier because he's clear away from all of the other data. So then we would say our outlier would be a coordinate point. And you can't see this in the video because I have it cropped, but in your book you should be able to see that the x is 14 and its y is about 14 because it's in between 10 and 15 but closer to 15. So if I was to describe this scatter plot, I would say it has no association, but it does have an outlier of 14, 14. And that would be my final answer. So now your task is to go into the Google Classroom, go to classwork, and then go into Module 3. There should be a material that is posted that says classwork or classmates scatter plots. You're going to click on that and there should be a slideshow attached. I will post everybody's scatter plots on that slideshow. You need to pick 3 of your classmates and analyze them. Answer those questions that we just went through. So you'll answer those questions in a Google document that I have made for you in the assignment under Module 3 that says Interpreting Scatter Plots. I know there's a lot of steps to that. If you have questions on how to navigate everything, please let me know.